Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
Hello, a very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. My name is Edmund Kizito, your host. On Spectrum tonight, Kenya ushers in a new era. What lessons can we take from this transition and words spoken at the inauguration? Kenya has ushered in a new era with the coming of a new team of leaders after a peaceful handover of power from Mwai Kibaki to Uhuru Kenyatta, who has now been duly sworn in as Kenya's fourth president. The new leadership is tasked with uniting the country that has, since the contested 2007 elections, developed entrenched ethnic divisions on top of other challenges such as those that are common in Uganda today. Kenyan pundits say that the Jubilee leadership faces the huge task of putting in place a committed team to implement the manifesto. One major challenge that awaits both President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto is the impending trial before the ICC, that's the International Criminal Court. Kenyatta has described this matter as a personal one that will not affect the functioning of his government. Referring to the ICC, outgoing Kenyan President Mwai Kibaki asked the international community to support the new leadership instead of fighting it. Kenyatta himself insisted that his government would respect international obligations, but only if they are based on mutual respect. President Yoweri Museveni, who gave a keynote speech on behalf of other heads of state and dignitaries, was more critical of the ICC, saying it had been abused by those who want to impose puppets on other countries. He insisted that the Kenyan indictments were an attempt by the ICC to blackmail Kenyans and that he was very happy that Kenyans voted against this grand plan. Uganda is a party to the Rome Statute, which puts in place the ICC, and it is one of those few countries that have asked the ICC to help deal with its challenge, that's the Lord's Resistance Army rebels. Now, the peaceful transfer of power in Kenya today and the speeches made at this function provide many lessons for Africa and Uganda in particular. And tonight we reflect on the events and the words spoken. Now, after being sworn in, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta addressed the nation, promising that the Jubilee government would implement its manifesto fully, but urged Kenyans to unite and help the new government to build the country. There is concern that the disunity caused by the 2007 contested elections could have been deepened by the recent election. Let us begin this program by listening to what President Kenyatta said about what the nation needs to do to move forward.
The time has come not to ask what community we come from, but rather what dreams we share. The time has come to ask not what political party we belong to, but rather what partnerships we can build. The time has come to ask not who we voted for, but what future we are all devoted to. We must move forward together. Let us remember that although we may not be bound together by ethnicity or cultural practices or religious conviction, our kinship rests solidly upon the fact that we have all been adopted by Kenya's borders. We are all bound to one constitution, which calls us to rise above our individual ideologies and march to our national anthem, to reflect on the power of peace, to recall the supreme value of freedom, to believe once more in the beauty of service and brotherhood, to aspire each day to the dignity that results from hard work and to contend for the hope that justice brings. Let us move together, being confident that if we turn neither to the left nor to the right of our national values, we as a people will see the promised land of prosperity that our forebearers set out for us.
Forebearers. President Uhuru Kenyatta talking about the forebearers, including his own father, founding president of that country, Mr. Kenyatta. He was barely 1 year old when his father took power in exactly 50 years ago this year. Our guests on Spectrum tonight, Mr. Asuman, Basalirwa, president of the Justice Forum Party, also known as JEEMA. You're most welcome, Mr. Basalirwa.
Thank you very much, and good evening to all our listeners.
We're also joined by Ambassador Kintu, Nyago, a Pan-African affairs analyst and publisher. He also works with the government and is a diplomat right now. You're most welcome, Ambassador Kintu, Nyago.
Good evening, listeners. Thank you, Edmund.
We're also joined by Mr. Yoga Adola, UPC Stalwart and a keen follower of African politics. You're most welcome, Mr. Adola.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Adola, you've lived in Kenya before. What is the main task, in your view, for the new president in that country?
Wow. difficult question. Yes, it is true I've lived in Kenya for about 10 years of my life. I went to school there. I have lots of friends in Kenya. This is a very difficult question to answer in a few minutes, but what the President of Kenya, President Kenyatta, has just said reflects his concern about what the problems that Kenya is facing. There is no question that ethnicity, identity, or tribes is going to affect Kenya's politics for a long time to come. Much as the President is saying, the Kenyans should ignore that. That's totally unrealistic. The question of the ICC is probably the most threatening thing, in my view, to Kenya today. From what I gather, the ICC has considerable evidence against the two. And the ICC has its own credibility to defend. It's not just going to move away from this case and lose credibility. So I think the ICC issue is a very, very serious issue. The United States has, for instance, taken very strong stand on this ICC thing. And I have a feeling this thing may lead us to possibly sanctions against Kenya.
Well, very interesting introduction there. Mr. Asuman, Basar, what's your own view? Outline for us what you think the priorities would be from Mr. Kenyatta?
Well, I think the speech, one thing run through the speech, there is concern for unity in diversity. I think they appreciate that the ethnic divisions are really very deep, and I suppose that the Jubilee leadership would want to prove to the whole country, the region, and maybe the whole world that whereas it is true they belong to certain, ethnic backgrounds, they are here to work for the Kenyans. So I think that's going to be a very big challenge. It is something they are going to address. I don't belong to the school of thought that seeks to demonize, tribes, religions. No, my only concern would be how somebody uses their tribe, their religion, in terms of relationship with other people. In our societies where we don't have developed social classes, people feel much more comfortable, grouping in their tribes, their religions, and I have always argued that the way person is marginalized is the way they will organize. When the Europeans came here, they marginalized Africans. Africans organized to chase them away. It didn't mean Africans were racists. It was about being marginalized. If you marginalize me as a Msoga, I am likely to mobilize the Basoga to fight back. So I think even this whole aspect of ethnic shenanigans in Kenya must be looked at with both lenses and both eyes, to look at both the positive and negative aspects of it. When you use tribe, for example, to discriminate people, to cause mayhem, to perpetuate genocide, and all forms of vices, then it becomes a problem. But when you use tribe or religion to mobilize people for a cause, okay, to use it as a bridge to reach out to others, then it is the positive aspect out of it. And I think even in this aspect itself, a person like Kenyatta, who comes from a dominant tribe, he has an opportunity to use the fact that he belongs to a dominant tribe to reach out to other ethnic, groups, the minority groups you talk about, for example, the Maasai, the Kenyans of Somali origin, or the Somali Kenyans, as it were, and other minorities. So it can actually be both a positive and a negative depending on how actually he looks at it. The expectations of the people, in my view, I have heard and also read. I don't find anything substantially new. If you have listened to new presidents across Africa, even in Europe, by the way, it's there the same rhetoric. Somebody's talking about let's march together, we should look at our countries. That's the usual rhetoric in my view. And the Kenyans will be waiting in anticipation to see whether really the Jubilee coalition will move beyond this rhetoric, which has become very common in Africa. Back at home here, you'll find President Museveni talking about, you know, the same things. 1, 2, 3 years down the road, nothing is on the ground. You'll go to Rwanda, you'll go to most of these countries. So it's really, when you look at the speech, it's really, there is nothing new in terms of promises. So those of us who are accustomed to listening, to reading them, there is nothing new. But when it comes to practice, you know, operationalizing these words, we will wait to see 1, 2 years to come.
Do you think Kenyatta is a good president for that country in terms of competence? Assessing, but that's a broad thing to say.
Well, the fact that he was voted by Kenyans, I believe
those his technical credentials, forget about the politics. He was finance minister. Assess him on that.
Well, but you have to look at the entire Kibaki administration. What did they achieve? For example, I know that when they were faced with an economic crisis as a government in Kenya, I told you here before, they came up, for example, with the Essential Commodities Act, okay, in an attempt to address the skyrocketing prices of goods and services. Back at home here in Uganda, we were increasing the cost of public administration. In Kenya, they were coming up with the law to address the skyrocketing, you know, prices of goods and services. You can also look at how they have done as a government in terms of, for example, tourism. Kenya remains a very big, you know, tourism destination. It also remains a very big destination for, you know, many embassies, high commissions have their headquarters in Nairobi, in Kenya, which is the largest base. Yes, which is not here in Uganda. And if you're from Uganda, or you're from Tanzania, or Rwanda, or Burundi, that becomes a cause, that becomes a concern. You either have to admire them, okay, or begrudge them, okay? And if you are admiring them, you have to aspire to be like them. You must be magnetic as a country. You should also be able to attract some of those attributes. You know, what is pulling, for example, the international community to Kenya, okay? In Uganda, for example, we have aspects of tourism which we can nurture and be able to harness a lot of resources.
Not leverage them.
Have we utilized them? So
it's a broad debate. Well,
very broad.
All right. Ambassador Kintu Nyago, talk to us about what you think the main task for Mr. Kenyatta would be.
Well, I think one of the problems they have in Kenya is the disparity between the rich and the gap between the rich and poor in Kenya is a very big gap, and many of those conflicts that occurred have that basis, the basis of inequality. You might find that many of the people who are rioting, for example, in 2007, were from the slums, and you know, people who are landless. So the issue of landlessness also is another one, and clearly also tribalism. And tribalism has been in Kenyan politics has been negatively used by past regimes, especially the first two regimes. They were known to be to have a very strong clout of ethnic chauvinism. The first Mr. Kenyatta and also President Moi. Those regimes benefited their particular, disproportionately the tribes they came from, or the ethnic groups they came from. Now, so clearly that's a factor. I mean, and that plays a key role. It played a key role in the elections, because people were saying that if these people, when a group goes to power, it would marginalize us. And that was one of the key things that led to the 2007, yes, because people were saying that we are being locked out. And that history has shown that these leaders, when they go to power, they only care for their own. So that caused the conflict, plus, well, the nature of the constitution they had then, which centralized all the power, which was referred to as the imperial presidency, and all the power was centralized in Nairobi. Now, there are many opportunities now. You find that, for example, in my view, the coming together of, for whatever reason, or for political pragmatism, the coming together of Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta and Mr. Ruto, I think marks in its own way a sign of reconciliation.
The two tribes are on opposite sides.
Well, yes, those two, the main conflict, or some of the major conflicts in 2007 were between the people who support Ruto, the Kalenjin, and Mr. Kenyatta. But now that they are on the same ticket and they are the same government, I think that's a sign of reconciliation. And anybody who wants who wishes good for Kenya should promote that rather than trying to say throw them into a plane to go to The Hague and that kind of thing. I think they should promote that. Secondly, the other opportunity is that now Kenya has a new constitution, and it's this government that is going to implement that constitution. The constitution that attempts to solve some of these problems I've been talking about democratically, constitutionally, through say devolution, through checks and balances and so forth. So this a government has to be stable to implement this constitution, because it's a new constitution, so it will be presenting a new political culture, and so trying to divert. And moreover, Kenya has many problems of its own, but also regional responsibilities: Somalia, South Sudan, East African integration, and so forth. So I think international actors like the ICC should not divert these new leaders from the gigantic task they have to, build Kenya, build their the constitutional rule, stabilize the region, economic integration, and so forth. Kenya also has many other, but first on the ICC, I take the view that the West never expected.
Well, first of all, Kenya is the economic engine of the region.
It is.
The economic engine. You can't understand. Apart from their, what they're doing in Somalia, they are the economic. If something happens to Kenya, it will affect all of us.
Yes, and also the gateway of the hinterland, like Uganda and so forth. But you find that I think that many Western countries never expected.
Well, they're shocked. Let's first of all assess the ICC, the merit of the ICC case. Does it hold any water? Two people are fighting, now they're forgiving each other. What right would you say they have to continue festering this discord?
Well, this ICC thing was introduced with the backing of many of the Kenyan political elite, including Mr. Kenyatta and Mr. Ruto. But that said, I think there are many lessons in history.
They should drop the case and do it.
No, there are many lessons in history we should learn from, whereby justice on its own should not be pushed to the forefront for example, at the expense of national integration.
Justice without context.
Take Northern Ireland, for example. People like many of those people say in the British government or the IRA or the Protestants.
All right.
They should have gone to The Hague or take South Africa, the apartheid regime, the Clerks and others, and so forth. Some are even arguing that Bush and Blair
should have gone there,
as opposed to the ICC.
Let's
we're going to
talk about that before we take a break. One point that you raised, you spoke about inequality in Kenya, imbalances, economic imbalances. Is there inequity as well? Or is there inequity as well, or is that something that is there inequity?
Kenya is a very unequal country, but that said, that inequality, the capitalist system there, has led to what you call that engine of growth. Well, but it's a very unequal society.
Let's take a break. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. Tonight, Kenya ushers in a new era. What lessons can we take from this transition and words spoken at the inauguration? We are going for a break. We'll be back.
So I'm chilling at home with my crew. The boys are waiting to watch the game on the telly, but the chicks want to go to the beach. So how do we play it? A glance across the room. Eye contact is made. A plan is hatched. Pete will get some sand. Lots of it. Jeff will take care of the deco, Tim the entertainment, and I the clubs. And so we bring the beach to the apartment. If we can't go to the beach, we bring the beach to us. It's just how we do it.
It's not about where you're at. It's the difference you bring. Get a fresh take on things. Club is brewed longer for easier drinking. Brewed slower for great taste. Club, tastefully different. Not for sale to persons under the age of 18.
We're not the first MTN, everywhere you go.
Communications Commission invites entries for the 3rd ASIA Awards, scheduled for June the 7th, 2013. Visit www.ucc.co.ug/awards for information on the categories and criteria. Deadline for entries is April the 30th, 2013. ASIA, ICT Innovation for National Development.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90.
Welcome back on Spectrum tonight. Kenya ushers in a new era. What lessons can we take from this transition and words spoken at the inauguration? Our guests tonight, Mr. Asuman Basalirwa, a world president of the Justice Forum, but also known as JEEMA, Ambassador Kintu, a Pan-African affairs analyst and publisher. He's been working for the government. Now he's become a diplomat. We're also joined by Mr. Ugandan. He once lived in Kenya, very close ties with that country. He's a UPC stalwart and keen follower of African politics. You two will be able to contribute to this discussion via a phone link. Now, as already stated, the new Kenyan leaders face a challenge related to the ICC, that's International Criminal Court trials, scheduled to start very soon. Uhuru Kenyatta described this as a personal challenge. Now, former President Kibaki urged the international community to support the new leaders instead of fighting them. Now, our very own dear beloved President Uhuru Museveni spoke about this ICC challenge. Well, a soundbite from President Museveni speaking in Nairobi today.
I want to salute the Kenyan voters on one other issue, the rejection of the blackmail by the International Criminal Court and those who seek to abuse this institution for their own agenda. I was one of those that supported the ICC because I abhor impunity. However, the usual opinionated and arrogant actors, using their careless and shallow analysis, have now distorted the purpose of that institution. They are now using it to install leaders of their choice in Africa and eliminate the ones they do not like. What happened here in 2007 was regrettable and must be condemned. A legalistic process, especially an external one, however, cannot address those events. Events of this nature need an ideological solution by discerning why they happen. Why did intercommunity violence occur? Was it for genuine reasons or for false reasons? Even if you assume there were genuine reasons as a hypothetical argument, why should villagers attack one another? Would the villagers have been responsible for whatever mistakes that would have occurred? Instead of a thorough and thoughtful process, we have got individuals engaged in legal gymnastics in far-off land. In Uganda's case, between 1966 and 1986, we lost about 800,000 people killed by the leaders who are in charge of that country. Have you ever heard us asking ICC or the United Nations to come and help us deal with that sad chapter of our history? Ninyi mwao kusikia kwamba tumeita Umoja wa Mataifa. Siwezi kukubali Umoja wa Taifa Uganda. We only referred Joseph Kony of LRA to ICC because he was operating outside Uganda. Otherwise, we would have handled him ourselves. Equally, Kenyan actors are the ones best qualified to sit and delve in their history in order to discover the ideological stimuli the Kenyan society needs. I therefore use this opportunity to salute the Kenyan voters again for rejecting that blackmail and upholding the sovereignty of the people of Kenya.
Mr. Kintu Nyago, Ambassador Kintu Nyago, that's the president speaking about the ICC in very, very derogatory, well, very pulling me down, really, not very, very kind words about the ICC. We have an ICC indictment on our honorable leader, Joseph Kony. What kind of speech is that?
I think the speech is based on a good analysis of the situation. Because you find Uganda is one of the signatories of the ICC. Yes. But Mr. Honorable Basalirwa was saying that was it you who said that there are a few countries? Actually, most African countries are signatories, and I think most European countries. There are just a few countries that are not. For example, Rwanda, the United States, and so forth. Yes. But most countries, possibly Russia and China, but most countries are signatories. But that said, in the case of Uganda, what happened is there was the issue of coin, and coining was beyond the borders of Uganda. Not that we don't have the competence. We have a very good judiciary. I mean, it has its challenges. And that judiciary even has a division now to deal with war crimes. But the problem is, those judges can't get coin. Coin is in Central Africa, coin is in Darfur, and so forth. But now, coming to the Kenyan situation, you find that what we have now in Kenya was a result, the external influence was not entirely negative. What we have in Kenya was a result of internal democratic forces and other forces and external pressure. Because after 2007 violence, what happened is the world could not allow Kenya to go into flames, given its strategic importance and so forth. In fact, one of the major lessons you should draw from that is that people should appreciate, the elite in the region should appreciate that we are at a time now whereby you cannot just walk up and say that you are going to go against the constitution and impose leadership. So that is what occurred in Kenya. So the external also played a role in the reforms that took place. For example, the constitution, Kofi Annan's coming in, people like Mukapa, President Museveni himself, and others. The United States played a role, I think Jendai Fraser and so forth. They all played a key role in pressurizing. And I would imagine that this pressure was even exerted behind the scenes during these elections, that you should not repeat what you did last time.
So it's not their purpose. We use the ICC as a scarecrow.
No. What I'm saying is, external influence had a positive role, but the ICC, which is part of that package, is negative in this instance, because that ICC played a very major role in galvanizing, for example, the support of the Jubilee. And people were saying that the ICC was a neo-colonial tool.
Well, that's another matter, really.
No, but that's what happened. And that's true. So I think that, and as the President points out, justice for its own sake,
it should be accorded. Mr. What's your own reading? We are wrong.
Let me respond.
The wrong president goes away and just bash this ICC.
The president may have his own interest in bashing the ICC.
What do you mean?
My friend here says he's a candidate, and not only him.
This is not a breather like this.
Olana Tulu has often said the president is a candidate of trial at the ICC. So he may have his own personal agenda in bashing the ICC. But that said, I want to address something which Mr. Kintu Nyago talked about as in the ICC being neo-colonial. Does one need the ICC to make Kenya a neo-colony? Kenya has been the best example of a neo-colonial all this time.
What do you mean? U.S. bases or military bases? Or what?
Not just that. Kenya is a neo-colony. And this has been there for a very long time.
Explain that one. And settler tea estates and dairy farms or what? Lord de la Mare? Doctor, what do you mean?
Kenya, when independence came, these former colonies were transformed into neo-colonies. That is, imperialism never left.
Explain
it.
That.
Only changed its format.
Explain that. We still get AD. Is it the same as Kenya? What do you mean? They have a large
I was going to address Uganda. Who is President Museveni to talk about ICC being a neo-colonial instrument? Uganda is a great neo-colony in itself.
Explain that very briefly.
Uganda, for instance, is almost like a state of the United States.
In what terms?
When the United... Okay, let me get to address that point itself. When the United States wants to go and overthrow Habyarimana in the interest of removing French influence, They come to Uganda and use Uganda troops to go and do the job. When the United States wants Mobutu removed because it has become an embarrassment, the United States doesn't put its troops on the ground. It comes to Uganda and gets troops from here who are cheaper than US soldiers and goes and does this thing. When the United States wants to fight in Somalia, it doesn't put its troops on the ground. They are too expensive. It comes and gets mercenaries from Uganda and goes to Somalia.
Tried in 1991 with very bloody results. Asuman Basalirwa.
Oh, it's a pity. I haven't addressed all the points I wanted to address on the
Very
answers.
briefly, do it in a minute in the House.
Now, the alliance between Kenyatta and Ruto is not forgiveness as you present it. It is an attempt by Kenyatta and Ruto to get themselves presidential immunity so that they cannot be touched by the ICC. Now, Museveni is also wrong to talk about the ICC being blackmail. He's again also wrong. He doesn't seem to even know when the ICC mandate begins, because he says the problems from 1966 to 1986 should be taken to The Hague. This whole president doesn't seem to know when the ICC began and when its mandate began.
Which is?
I don't.
Guys, it's mandate. Yeah, it's very recent. So I think feel something like that. Asuman Basalirwa, President, talk to us about what your fellow president was saying across the board.
No, I will begin with a correction. Being a president does not matter. You don't. The domestic immunity you enjoy as a president does not extend to the ICC. So if Ruto and Kenyatta allied for purposes of getting immunity, the Rome Statute is very clear. It does not recognize presidential immunity. Number two, it's I think also important for us to understand the history of this ICC. You know, since Nazi and the Nuremberg trials, certain crimes have been categorized as international crimes. And
against humanity.
International crimes, because of course the ICC has four aspects. We are talking about genocide, we are talking crimes against aggression, war crimes, and then crimes against humanity. Okay? Now, when we are talking about the ICC as blackmail, neo-colonialism, I want to tell you that the ICC is now a reality. It is a reality in the sense that even if you are not a signatory, as Sudan is, by virtue of what we call international customary law, you end up in the ICC. Okay? It is the reason. Yes. General Bashir is in the ICC. And the ICC, the Rome Statute, by the way, according to its own structure and composition, they have entered into an agreement with the UN. Okay? And a non-member state can find a member of a non-member state to the ICC can find himself or herself by a resolution of the UN Security Council. It is the reason the Bashirs are in the what? In the ICC. Now, there are two aspects why I think it's important for us to appreciate. The ICC statute talks about two issues. Number one, a country is unable to prosecute the crimes or unwilling. Now, the reason why it appears more as a target for Africans, they have exhibited the highest degree of inability or unwillingness. It is the reason why you find many of our people here are candidates there. Our own situation here. But by the way, very briefly, yes. Do you know? I continue. Go on. Do you know that Kenya had an opportunity of not? These guys, they had an opportunity. What could they have done? They should have moved very fast to institute inquiries and proceedings, because the ICC statute says once you initiate inquiries and investigations, the ICC does not intervene. They do not do it. Okay? So up to now, Sudan, okay? Yes, is complaining that the Kenyan government has not been cooperative. Now that brings in the other aspect of unwillingness. Yes. I want to argue that let's not exhibit double standards, because there is a lot of double standards, by the way, in the international community. China, America, Russia, don't subscribe to this. When it comes to making resolutions to send other countries, they do.
All right.
Those double standards are also here. In fact, they are not double standards. They are no standards at all. You are an architect in the ICC. The president here in Uganda, the Kenyans signed this instrument very willingly in their sober minds. They should not reach this stage, okay, and turn around. By the way, they have an opportunity to pull out. Yes, they have an opportunity.
Regarding the ICC and the very able articulation by the President of JEEMA, I'm concerned with quite many others about using the ICC possibly really a tool of neocolonialism and racism.
Let's talk about let's talk about the state.
Because you find that how come, and then the issues Basalirwa raises, one can question them in the sense that, look, the United States is an non-signatory. And when it attacked Iraq against the resolution of the United Nations, how come the people who are behind that political decision have never been taken to the Hague? So clearly you can say that there is a power play, there is possibly a racial angle, and really, clearly, UN Security Council would never sanction the arresting of President Bush, for example.
Let's hear from the listeners. This is
let's pull
out one. Our number 0414 348111 0312260 390 0312261 390. When you call in, please tell us your name and where you're calling from. Spectrum, hello? Yes, sir, your name? Yes, Lawrence. Interesting analysis there. Spectrum, hello? Hello. Yes, sir, your name? Good evening, your name? Spectrum, hello? Yes, sir, your name? Yes, bro. Let's get back to the studio. Mr. Yoga Adela, you can respond.
I would like to respond to some of the points Apollo and Intinda raised. I think it is correct for the ICC to go on, and from what I've observed, nothing is going to stop the ICC from its proceedings. The other thing is this: whatever we say, the situation in Kenya will get worse and worse as the ICC proceeds, and particularly just in case it finds certain people guilty. What we are likely to end up is a situation, a very, very explosive situation in Kenya. Already it is very explosive. The difference in the votes, Kenyatta's difference, is 0.7.
8,000 votes.
Yeah, but the majority was 0.7 something.
50.07.
50.07. That's very small. Kenya is very, very divided. And the elections did not produce a mandate, a clear mandate. The legitimacy of Kenyatta's presidency is in doubt. Now, when that is coupled with whatever sanctions which may come around as a result of the ICC, we are going to have a very explosive situation. We may have an implosion similar to that of Egypt. In any case, in my own view, Kenya is very ripe for something like a coup. Coups have so far been very unfashionable. But in the case of Kenya, if a coup took place, the Western powers who are behind the ICC are likely to look the other way.
President Basalirwa.
Yes.
Give us one scenario as you respond to this.
Yeah, I want to thank the callers. You see, the comments of the President Museveni just remind me of the local situation here of the marriage bill. You know, cabinet introduces a bill, its ministers of cabinet go and campaign it. Okay, then eventually they withdraw it. It is some scenario. When the president makes these comments in Kenya, I am not surprised at all. An architect of the ICC, a signatory, then he goes and begins to same situation here. So that's not very surprising. I want to argue that justice should precede reconciliation. There must be justice first, then reconciliation should follow. If you don't do that, you breed hypocrisy. Okay? You breed hypocrisy, you breed marriages of convenience. Finally, this idea of immunity, I am among those who argue that the immunity that the Constitution confers on the presidents should be removed. Internally here, these presidents should be subjected to civil and criminal procedures.
Even when they hold office.
Even when they hold office.
Ambassador Nyago.
I'm of the view that justice and in practice, justice is never pursued for its own ends. Justice has to be pursued in light of the broader societal objective, like say social cohesion and so forth. That's why you find, for example, that other mechanisms have been put in place, like the Truth and Reconciliation Mechanism in South Africa. That's why you find that in Northern Ireland, where many people died, but neither Jerry Adams or the people behind the British Army or whatever, Thatcher is going to be buried with all the whatever,
be cremated, I think.
Whatever, with all the Queen and Prince Philip. Yes, they are not going to go to the Hague. So the point, so that's important. Now, secondly, the legitimacy of Uhuru Kenyatta. Fine, the Jubilee got 50.7. Agreed. Mr. Raila Odinga and his court were formidable opponents. They got 43%, but there's a wide gap. 7% is quite
true. That's very
but in as much as the court is also formidable, and the legitimacy of that vote is not in doubt in light of the structures in place, like the Electoral Commission, in light of the ruling of the Supreme Court of Kenya, and in light of all the reports of other credible actors like the Carter Center, President Mukapa, and many others, President Banda, and many others. Now also, there is nothing like a coup that can take place in Kenya. The Kenyan army has illustrated since the 1965 mutiny and the reforms that took place in Kenya.
1882 as well.
Well, but it was crushed when Raila and others tried to do whatever they did. They were crushed within no time. But the point is, the Kenyan army has illustrated a fairly or a very high level of impartiality and professionalism. Oh yes. Now, the region needs Kenya. The region needs Kenya, and the West. That's why these very people who are saying that choices have got consequences have been there. And President Obama sent a congratulatory message to Uhuru Kenyatta.
A technical one, very strategic.
Whatever it is,
but that's where you are going.
All right. Mr. Yuka,
where is going?
Why did Raila Odinga stay away?
I don't know. I personally don't know, but that goes to add to my point of legitimacy. Raila Odinga's presence at the swearing in would have added tremendously to what you've talked about of reconciliation and to the legitimacy of the regime. Now, his being away is a clear indication that I don't recognize that government.
All right, we have to go, but before we go, Mr. Asuman Basalirwa, who Mr. William Ruto said that he insinuated that President Kibaki emeritus voted for Uhuru Kenyatta. Do you think this vote could have been rigged?
Speaking as a legal practitioner, I think it was really unfortunate for the Supreme Court of Kenya to reject evidence which was at its doorsteps. That does not happen here. In our own election petitions, at least courts recognize that gathering affidavits from all over the country is a very tedious exercise. In Kenya, it was very strange. Perhaps if that evidence had been admitted, if it had been allowed, maybe so many things would have been revealed. So I could say maybe it was rigged, maybe it was not rigged, but either way, the court took a decision as an office of court in East Africa. Yes. We may disagree with it, but we have to respect it.
The Kenyan Supreme Court is composed of very competent people led by Justice William Otunga.
The man who has an hearing in 1 year.
So whatever he did, but the point is his decision or their decision was based on good merit. Yes.
They came in wearing very nice robes. We have to go. Thank you very much. Dear guest, Mr. Asuman Basalirwa, President of the Justice Forum, Party JEEMA. Your fellow president went with a Pullman at Mercedes-Benz. We saw it for the first time during celebrations last year.
He's a man who is accustomed to pomp, ostentation, and pageantry. In these days, we say he's a man of swagger.
We have to go. Ambassador Nyago, Pan-Africanist Affairs Analyst, thank you for kind publisher. He's been working for the government, very close with President Museveni. Now he's a diplomat, gone to the US in New York, the people he loves to hate. Mr. Yoga Hadola, UPC Stalwart and Kintu of African politics. Thank you for tuning in. Happy New Year, Edmund Kizito Spectrum. We'll be back tomorrow. Right now, you can hear the news in the English language.